Chapter 24. The Inevitable. 2 weeks later, Osokin is waiting for Zinaida in the park by the river. He walks up and down the path, smoking. How strange all this is, he says to himself. I've never experienced anything like it. I don't know what it is, love or something like that. I like to see her, I like to talk to her, I wait for her here every day like a schoolboy, and we go on the river. It would be hard for me now to miss a single day. Yet the first time I saw her I definitely did not like her, either her style or herself as a woman. Later, on the contrary, I began to like her very much, but in my attitude towards her there is nothing personal. It's unlike anything I've read or heard of, and it's so unlike me. At the same time, I know that these meetings can have no sequel. I must go away. That is inevitable. Nothing will come of my staying here. I like knowing Zinaida very much, but life will soon put an end to it. It's a pure chance that I've been free these last 2 weeks, and with enough money to come here. But I don't in the least know what I shall do next week. Of course she doesn't understand or realise it. He turns round and looks along the avenue. But why does she not come? It's already 1 o'clock and they have lunch at 12. Well, in a year's time everyone here will be just as it is now. It may be that she'll be walking along this same avenue, and I shall no longer be here. Where shall I be? It's difficult even to imagine. A week later, Osokin and Zinaida are walking in the park. The path is already strewn with yellow leaves. Well, are you going to Australia soon? Asked Zinaida, looking at Osokin with a smile. You know I'm not going anywhere, answers Osokin. Zinaida laughs and pulls him by the sleeve. I shall never forgive you, she says. If only you knew how angry you made me with your Australia. Often I simply wanted to hit you. Men are so awfully stupid sometimes. Surely a woman shows plainly that she's interested in a man if she's ready to see him every day, if she spends nearly all her time with him and invents different reasons for meeting him. And in return for all this, I have been offered plans about Australia. Yes, my dear, you were delightful, but now I want you to tell me about Australia. Darling, says Osokin, taking her hand, you ought to understand how hard it was for me to say all that. If it was hard, why did you do it? I thought it was inevitable. Circumstances had arranged themselves in such a way that I could not think of anything else, and it was decided long before I met you. Yes, but I've been imprudent enough to suppose that meeting me might have changed some of your plans. Evidently not. That hasn't even occurred to you. So at last I've had to take the trouble of explaining the position to you myself. What can you say in your defence? I can't say anything, says Osokin. Well, but what about your circumstances? You said they made it imperative for you to go to Australia. Have they changed then? It isn't that they have changed. They've simply lost all meaning. I don't believe I have felt nearer to the world of fairy tales than I do now. And when I feel that, it seems to me that everything will be different, and not what I thought it would be. Well, let us suppose you are not going to Australia, but will remain here. I'm interested to know whether I occupy any place in your plans or not. Osokin suddenly takes her in his arms and kisses her. Listen, have you gone mad? Zinaida tears herself away from him and arranges her hair. She's really angry and frightened. We could be seen here at any moment. Let them see. I'll kiss you each time you mention Australia. I'll give you my word. How good of you. Yes, now you've become brave. Do you remember how it was a week ago? You were afraid to touch my hand. Of course, it is very easy for you to be brave now when I've done all the difficult part, began to speak to you of myself and made you speak. Certainly. Now you hold all the trumps. This is what always happens, and we women always pay for our frankness and candour. But I mean to punish you. When we get home I shall go on talking about Australia, and to keep your word you'll be obliged to kiss me all the time. She laughs. I can imagine what Mother's face will look like when you kiss me, and the lady with the little dog will also be there, and the proper young maidens of the locality who come to see me. Will you like that? You see how easy it is to catch you out, and how much your promises are worth. Her eyes are sparkling with 1,000 fires. That's the first thing, and now the second. I'm interested to know how long we might have gone on talking about poetry and new art if I had not, one fine day, upsets your good behaviour. You men are usually supposed to be the stronger sex, but what would you do without us? Why do you look in my eyes? No, please don't show your courage. We are just coming to the houses. Let us talk seriously. I still want to know your plans. If you are not going to Australia, then what do you intend to do? Have you any plans or not? You see how frankly I put my questions. Osokin glances at Zinaida, and he realizes that it has been very difficult for her to force herself to speak in this way, knowing that he will not speak himself. He realizes too that she is trying to make it easier for him to approach her, but also that she is embarrassed and wants to conceal her embarrassment by speaking to him as though she were joking. A feeling of great tenderness for her takes hold of him, but at the same time a certain annoyance flares up in him. Why does she want to make him speak? She should understand that he cannot speak yet. He looks at Zinaida again and feels sorry for her and ashamed of his faults. How can she be blamed for anything? She only wants to help him. He is now filled with gratitude to her, and a particularly deep regret that he cannot answer her as she expects. What prevents him? Cowardice and a ridiculous kind of pride. He's afraid of finding himself in a false position. She is a rich girl and he has nothing. In fact, he is so penniless that only yesterday he pawned his overcoat in order to come here. And he has absolutely nothing to look forward to, except what may come by chance. He has got off the beaten track. How will her mother and her brother regard him? In what position will he stand in relation to them? If she were alone, or if his tongue were not tied, if he were not afraid to speak, but could tell her straight out how things were, then perhaps between them they might find a way out. Osokin feels that she wants him to speak, and yet he feels that he will say nothing. He knows this state of mind very well. There have been times before in his life when out of pride he has pretended not to notice that people wanted to help him and were making advances to him. In this way he has repelled them, and he has been aware of doing it. It is the same now. Well, this is his fate. He cannot act differently. Why do you say nothing? Asked Zinaida. Because I cannot say what I would like to say. What prevents you? I need time. Just now everything is still going on as it did before. You know I wanted to go away and didn't much care what was happening here. Now I am not going, and I want to arrange my life here, but it needs time. Zinaida frowns with displeasure. I don't like time. You know I like to have things at once. If I'm told that I must wait for something, I'm ready to give it up. It's already spoiled for me. You know this feeling? If I were offered a trip to the moon and then it appeared that I had to wait 2 years for it, I should give up on any moon in the world. And you? I quite understand that, says Osokin, but perhaps I shall wait for the moon. He smiles and looks at her. That is why I can say nothing now. They are silent for some time. Osokin feels a pang at his heart. He knows that he has offended Zinaida and repulsed her, and at the same time he knows that he could not have spoken differently. Zinaida is looking straight in front of her, her lips tightly pressed together. It seems to Osokin that now she is sorry she has spoken, and he is annoyed with himself and with everything. She ought to understand that our relationship cannot be like any ordinary one, he thinks. Things can't be as they would have been with any other man. I am in an exceptional position. I can't even dress decently. When they move to town she will want me to go everywhere with her. She has already spoken about it. Where am I to get the money for this? I only just manage to exist at present, and even that is difficult enough. No, something must happen or I really shall have to go away. So far, for some reason, fate has always come to my rescue at the last moment. We'll see what will happen this time. But perhaps I'm just a fool. Perhaps she is my fate. Perhaps I should just tell her everything quite simply and discuss it with her. This is what she wants and what she is asking of me, and that is precisely what I cannot do. I repulse her in this way. I know it and can do nothing about it. By now they are quite near to the house. Osokin has the feeling that in another half-hour he would have spoken. Will you come in? asks Zinaida. No, I'll see you tomorrow, says Osokin. I don't want to speak to anyone but you today. You're not going anywhere? I? No, nowhere, says Zinaida slowly, looking away as though she were thinking of something else. I shall not be going anywhere for some time." Osokin feels that she is annoyed and hurt by this talk. She seems troubled and sad. He bends towards her slightly. Somehow he feels madly, painfully sorry for her. He wants to say something tender and comforting, to kneel before her, to beg her forgiveness, to ask her not to leave him, not to believe in his coldness. Her hands are cold. He kisses her fingers and her hand drops passively. They walk in silence to the garden gate. "Of course I know it's my fault," says Osokin to himself as he walks up and down the wooden platform at the station, waiting for his train. A man has no right to be in such a helpless position as this. One cannot be a permanent failure. In such a case one ought to go away and disappear, or start a new life in some way. It's no use knocking about here. Yes, I'd give a great deal now to have the money I lost at Bob's. But on the other hand, to be quite fair to destiny, if I had not lost my money, I should not yet have come to Moscow, and should probably never have met Zinaida. So there was something good even in that. Well, all right, we'll see what will happen next. I must find work of some kind so that I can at least dress decently and have enough money for theatres and all such nonsense. Otherwise I shall not be able to see Zinaida during the winter. It's a good thing they've decided to stay in the country for the whole of September. But how wonderfully nice she is! How beautiful it would be if I could tell her. Then it's true. I do feel something quite extraordinary about her. And she? Why does she like me? I can't understand it. She says she has never talked to anyone as she has to me. But how strange it is. I've never experienced anything like this. It is something quite new. And how necessary she has become to me. Why can I find no words when I'm speaking to her? If she were here now, at this moment, I could tell her everything. Chapter 25. A Winter's Day. A cold, sunny winter day in Moscow. Osokin and Zinaida are walking along Ouspensky Boulevard. Osokin is wearing a thin overcoat and a felt hat. They have been silent for a long time, then Zinaida begins to speak. "I don't understand you. You say that you want to see me, that you always have so much to tell me, and it's true. We always had very much to tell each other. But why must we meet by stealth in the streets? Why can't you come to our house as everyone else does? I'm beginning to think that for some reason you don't want to attract attention to yourself and me. All this gives me the impression that you are afraid of someone, trying to conceal from someone that you are interested in me. To me, this is strange. I realize that your finances are not in a very bright condition, but why don't you arrange them? It could be done so easily. You have a ridiculous kind of pride. Why won't you do what was suggested to you a short while ago? I know about it. You must forget for a time that you're a poet and take a job. It can easily be arranged, and then you will immediately have credit for whatever you want." "Darling, you don't understand that it is quite impossible." "Why is it impossible? Other people work. You could write poetry in the evenings. Surely you realize that you cannot live by writing poetry. Are there many people who understand your poems?" Osokin laughs gaily. "Oh, I must tell you an amusing story. The day before yesterday I went to that picnic with the Leontovs, because I thought you would be there. On the whole, it was very dull, although it was a wonderful day. It was cold and everything sparkled. The snow was fresh and soft on the fields, on the lake and on the pines. The sun was shining and everything glittered, especially when we drove out of the forest and the road stretched away down before us. You know, I had the impression that a huge white cat was laying on its back, basking in the sun and purring. The best way to express such fleeting impressions is in poems of one line, for the more you leave to the imagination of the reader or the hearer, the better. So I put it all in one line. The fluffy white belly of winter. How do you like it? Can you see a huge fluffy white cat?" Zinaida cannot help laughing. "It's very good," she says, "but I'm afraid that after reading that line every ordinary mortal will ask, 'And what comes next?'" "Quite right, and that is how it should be, only next is in the reader himself. If he doesn't see that and wants to have everything given him, he had better subscribe to the Neva. This is just what happened the other day, and that's what I wanted to tell you. I was rash enough to speak of my poetical experiments of my companions in the sleigh. It evoked great merriment. They started to pester me with this very question of what comes next. Then, as I didn't answer, they tried to compose a continuation, They began to look for rhymes, the most awful things, and generally to amuse themselves. The others too. They all liked it. It became a sort of petit jeu, and everyone tried his wits. Zinaida glances at him. Tell me the truth, was this not unpleasant for you? There was nothing unpleasant at the beginning. I laughed quite honestly with them and quite shared their point of view, because really they cannot look at it in any other way. But after a while I began to feel angry with myself for having started the talk, and in order to stop it I made several impromptu verses about them. They didn't know whether to laugh or be offended. They roared with laughter when they repeated my verses to one another, but they really felt very foolish. And that amuses you? asks Zinaida with a slight grimace. No, not particularly. It was silly of me to begin talking about my verses, but I was bored. I was sorry you was not there. And I am not sorry at all, says Zinaida. You were gay enough without me. She looks straight in front of her, and Osokin glances at her in surprise. I don't understand, he thinks. What was it she didn't like? Certainly not what I told her, but something has displeased her. Osokin says something else to her, but she listens absently and continues with her own thoughts. We've wandered away from what we were talking about before, she says. You needn't justify yourself. I don't mind your enjoying yourself, but to me it is strange that you never have any time for me, and that something always prevents you from coming to our house. I'm only trying to understand it. I don't know why you refuse to consider the job that Misha mentioned to you. You will be given well-paid work, and if you like you can look on it as temporary. Osokin glances at her again and for a moment wants to agree with everything she says. You're quite right, he says, and I will think about it seriously, but try to understand that for me it would be just as strange to become a civil servant as, for instance, to join a revolutionary party. That also was suggested to me not long ago, and print pamphlets in cellars and agitate among conscious workmen. I cannot imagine myself a comrade. Thank God I saw enough of them abroad. You know, he continues without noticing Zinaida's frown of displeasure, once, when I was in Paris, I was invited to an evening arranged by one of these parties or groups. They just talked and talked, how bad everything was, how miserable everybody was, and how beautiful everything would be if there were no police, no Cossacks and no general governors. But when it came to having tea, it transpired that the members of the committee had eaten all the cakes and oranges, and drank all the tea, so there was nothing left for the rest of us. Zinaida becomes exasperated. I am not interested in your friends, either in Paris or in Moscow, she says impatiently. What will have these two things in common? Those parties are sheer lunacy or worse, and you know that quite well yourself. What I'm speaking about is a perfectly normal thing. You should be working for yourself and also for the sake of being with me. For some time they walk in silence. Darling Zulu lady, thinks Osokin in the words of a Petersburg writer he particularly likes. How beautifully she finished with revolution. She doesn't realize for a second that there are people who die for this idea. And the funniest thing is that fundamentally she is quite right. These people are good for nothing. They will probably cause a great deal of harm, but they will never create anything. Some of them are very nice people, quite sincere and terribly unselfish, but those will perish. Only scoundrels will survive. Yet at the same time Osokin feels a little uneasy, and he looks at Zinaida with a kind of question in his glance. The government and all that belongs to it has become so unpopular in the last 20 years that, like all the intelligentsia, he has a certain almost obligatory sympathy towards any anti-government attitude or activity, and he cannot understand why Zinaida does not share his feeling in this respect. Osokin himself does not believe in the necessity or advantage of a revolution in Russia. He can see the possibility of a different way, if only those in responsible positions would not be so childishly selfish and stupid. There is still much that is good in the people, and he dislikes the party public, as he calls them, and their presumptuous talk, even more than he dislikes the arrogance of official Russia. Nevertheless, Zinaida's attitude jars on him slightly, and somehow lowers her in his eyes, although he does not like to feel this. An extraordinary vivid picture passes through his mind. He was a boy of 12 or 13 in the second or third form at school. One Saturday afternoon he was walking down Petrovna from Konetsky Most, going to buy a pair of kid gloves at Babushkin's with some money he'd received for the New Year. Suddenly, in this narrow, old-fashioned street with low houses and a church on the corner, but with the best and most expensive shops in Moscow, and especially the large flower shops, there appeared a low, broad peasant's sledge with a small piebald horse, driven by a peasant in a sheepskin coat and a fur cap. In the sledge, between two soldiers with drawn swords, was sitting or kneeling a most extraordinary-looking man, dressed in a convict's yellow coat and small yellow cap. His hands were tightly clenched in front of him with chains hanging from the wrists. His thin, emaciated face, with a thin black beard, which at once reminded Osokin of the face of John the Baptist in Ivanov's picture, was raised up. His head, with its flowing black hair, was thrown back, and the gaze of his strange, unseeing eyes seemed to pass high over the street with its gay crowd, quickly moving sledges, and shining carriages with beautiful horses. This vision lasted only a few moments. The sledge disappeared among the traffic. Osokin remembers how he stopped and looked after the sledge. Where had they taken him? He asked himself. Evidently to the law courts. They would send him to Siberia. Who is he? What has he done? And he felt terribly afflicted, and suddenly lost interest in everything. He feels that Zinaida would never understand this vision. She would never feel the incomprehensible side of it. For her it would be, quite seriously and in a grown-up way, only lunacy or worse. "I feel that something stands between us," says Zinaida, breaking into Osokin's thoughts. "I don't want to think anything, I don't want to suppose anything, but I feel it. Perhaps you are right not to speak of it to me." "Darling, there is nothing for me to speak about." "Perhaps not, but this is how I feel," repeats Zinaida. "I believe there is something which is gradually affecting me. I'm not the same towards you as I was in the summer. You mustn't be offended. I still have a great deal of feeling for you, but it's not what it was. I'm a little afraid of you, afraid of coming too near to you, and then finding that I am unnecessary, or that I am interfering with something, or with someone. Don't argue with me. I know what you will say, but I'm telling you how I feel about it, and I'm afraid it will become worse as time goes on. Please understand that I'm very sorry about it. I liked our meetings very much, and I like my feelings for you. I've never had such an attitude towards anyone before. I even wanted to look after you, to think about your life. I mean all this quite seriously, and it's not like me at all. I'm such an egoist, and I never concern myself about anyone as a rule. Try to understand that I like the fact that, in relation to you, I was becoming different, such as I'd never been before. But you forced me to remain as I was, and to have the same attitude towards you as I have to everyone else. Well, so be it, only I shall be sorry if my feeling for you disappears altogether. Well, now it is time to go home. It was time long ago. Tomorrow, as you suggested, we may go to the museum. I must confess that I've never been there, and you say there are interesting pictures. Well, you can meet me in the same place at the same time as today, but think about what I have said to you. Don't argue, just think." Osokin walks home. "I understand nothing," he says to himself. "Why is it all turning out like this? I like her, I like to be with her, I would do anything for her. I've never experienced anything like it in all my life. Every night I walk twice, sometimes several times past the house where she lives, and it gives me enormous pleasure just to see the windows of her room. At the same time everything is happening in the wrong way, and I'm doing all the wrong things. I never tell her what I ought to tell her, or what I think and feel. Why? It's as though there was a mist around me, or as though I were tied and forced to act in this way and in no other. And then, why am I all of a sudden so disgusted at the thought of that job? When I first came to Moscow I should have grasped it with both hands had it been offered to me. But now such deadly boredom takes hold of me at the very thought of this employment that I cannot raise a finger to do anything about it. I invent all kinds of explanations for Zinaida, and I see that she does not believe me. But seriously speaking, how can I accept help from her relatives or friends? That is absolutely impossible. At the same time I realize that I'm spoiling everything for myself by my own actions. She doesn't understand me. I seem odd to her. If only she could understand what I feel about her, and how awfully difficult it is for me. I worry all the time and can find no way out. Ways that would be simple and natural for other people are, for some reason, impossible and quite closed for me. Can it really be that she will change towards me? Is there anything I can do? Why is there this terribly cold feeling in me as though I already knew and felt that something disastrous and final is bound to happen, as it has always happened before? Chapter 26. The Turn of the Wheel. On the screen, a scene at Kursk Station in Moscow. A bright April day of 1902. A group of friends who came to see Zinaida Krutiskaya and her mother off to the Crimea stand on the platform by the sleeping car. Among them, Ivan Osokin, a young man about 26. Osokin is visibly agitated, although he tries not to show it. Zinaida is talking to her brother, Mikhail, Osokin's friend, a young officer in the uniform of one of the Moscow Grenadier regiments, and two girls. Then she turns to Osokin and walks aside with him. "I'm going to miss you very much," she says. "It's a pity you cannot come with us. Though it seems to me that you don't particularly want to, otherwise you would come. You don't want to do anything for me. Your staying behind now makes all your talks ridiculous and futile. But I am tired of arguing with you. You must do as you like." Ivan Osokin becomes more and more troubled, but he tries to control himself and says with an effort, "I can't come at present, but I shall come later, I promise you. You cannot imagine how hard it is for me to stay here." "No, I cannot imagine it, and I don't believe it," says Zinaida quickly. "When a man wants anything as strongly as you say you do, he acts. I am sure you're in love with one of your pupils here, some nice poetical girl who studies fencing. Confess!" she laughs. Zinaida's words and tone hurt Osokin very deeply. He begins to speak, but stops himself, then says, "You know that it is not true. You know I am all yours." "How am I to know?" says Zinaida with a surprised air. "You are always busy. You always refuse to come and see us. You never have any time for me. And now I should so much like you to come with us. We should be together for 2 whole days. Just think how pleasant this journey would be." She throws a quick glance at Osokin. "And afterwards, there in the Crimea, we would ride together and we would sail far out to sea. You would read me your poems, and now I shall be bored." She frowns and turns away. Osokin tries to reply, but finding nothing to say, he stands biting his lips. "I shall come later," he repeats. "Come when you like," says Zinaida indifferently, "but this chance is lost already. I shall be bored travelling alone. Mother is a very pleasant travelling companion, but that is not what I want. Thank God I have seen one man I know, evidently going by this train. He may amuse me on the way." Osokin again begins to speak, but Zinaida continues. "I'm only interested in the present. What do I care for what may happen in the future? You don't realize this. You can live in the future. I cannot." "I understand it all," says Osokin, "and it's very hard for me, yet I cannot help it. But will you remember what I asked you?" "Yes, I shall remember, and I'll write to you, but I don't like writing letters. Don't expect many. Come soon instead. I shall wait a month for you, 2 months. After that I will not wait any more. Well, let us go. Mother is looking for me." They rejoin the group by the sleeping car. Osokin and Zinaida's brother walk down towards the station exit. "What is the matter, Vanya?" said Mikhail Krutinsky. "You don't look very cheerful." Osokin is not in a mood for talking. "I'm all right," he says, "but I'm sick of Moscow. I, too, should like to go away somewhere." They come out towards the large asphalt square in front of the station. Krutinsky shakes hands with Osokin, walks down the steps, hails a carriage and drives off. Osokin stands for a long time looking after him. "There are times when it seems to me that I remember something," he says to himself slowly, and others when it seems that I've forgotten something very important. I feel as though all this had happened before in the past, but when? I don't know. How strange. Then he looks round like a man waking up. Now she is gone and I'm here alone. Only to think I might be travelling with her at this very moment. That would be all I could wish for at present. To go south to the sunshine and to be with her for 2 whole days. Then later on to see her every day, and the sea and the mountains. But instead of that I stay here, and she doesn't even understand why I don't go. She doesn't realise that at the present moment I have exactly 30 kopecks in my pocket, and if she did, it would make it no easier for me. He looks back once more at the entrance to the station hall, then with a bent head goes down the steps to the square. 3 months later at Ivan Osokin's lodgings. A large room which is rented furnished. Rather poor surroundings. An iron bedstead with a grey blanket, a washstand, a chest of drawers, a small writing table, an open bookcase. On the walls portraits of Shakespeare and Pushkin, and some foils and masks. Osokin, looking very perturbed and irritated, is walking up and down the room. He flings aside a chair that is in his way. Then he goes to the table, takes from the drawer 3 letters in long, narrow, grey envelopes, reads them one after another, and puts them back. First letter. Thank you for your letters and your verses. They are delightful, only I should like to know to whom they refer. Not to me, I am sure. Otherwise you would be here. Second letter. You still remember me? Really, it often seems to me that you write from habit or from a strange sense of duty you have invented for yourself. Third letter. I remember everything I said. The 2 months are coming to an end. Don't try to justify yourself or to explain. That you have no money, I know, but I have never asked for it. There are people living here who are much poorer than you. Osokin walks about the room, then pauses near the table and says aloud, and she writes no more. The last letter came a month ago, and I write to her every day. There is a knock at the door. Osokin's friend, Stupitsin, a young doctor, walks into the room. He shakes hands with Osokin and sits down at the table in his overcoat. What is the matter with you? You're looking very ill. He comes quickly to Osokin and with mock seriousness tries to feel his pulse. Osokin smiles and waves him away, but the next moment a shadow crosses his face. Everything is rotten, Volodya, he says. I can't express it clearly to you, but I feel as though I had cut myself off from life. All you other people are moving on while I am standing still. It looks as though I had wanted to shape my life in my own way, but had only succeeded in breaking it to pieces. The rest of you are going along by the ordinary ways. You have your life now and a future ahead of you. I try to climb over all the fences, and the result is that I have nothing now and nothing for the future. If only I could begin again from the beginning. I know now that I should do everything differently. I should not rebel in the same way against life and everything it offered me. I know now that one must first submit to life before one can conquer it. I've had so many chances, and so many times everything has turned in my favour. But now there is nothing left. You exaggerate, says Stopintzin. What difference is there between you and the rest of us? Life is not particularly pleasant for anyone. But why has anything especially disagreeable happened to you? Nothing has happened to me, only I feel out of life. There is another knock at the door. Osokin's landlord, a retired civil servant, comes in. He is slightly drunk and extremely affable and talkative, but Osokin is afraid he will ask for his rent and tries to get rid of him. When the landlord has gone, Osokin, with a look of disgust on his face, waves his hand towards the door. You see, the whole of life is a petty struggle with petty difficulties like that, he says. What are you doing this evening? I'm going to the Samoylovs. They are talking of forming a circle for spiritualistic, mediumistic, or some such investigations, a society for psychical research in Hamnavik. Will you be there? I believe you're interested in that sort of thing. Yes, I was, although I see more and more that it is all nonsense. But I am not invited. You see, I told you I had strayed from the fold. They are a set of people vaguely connected with the university, but always emphasizing this connection. What am I to them? I'm a stranger and an outsider, and it is the same everywhere. 3/4 of their interests and 3/4 of their talk are completely foreign to me, and they all feel this. They invite me sometimes out of politeness, but day by day I feel that the gulf grows wider. People talk to me differently from the way they talk to one another. Last week, 3 silly girl students advised to me read Karl Marx, and they did not even understand when I said I should prefer milk soup. You see what I mean? It is certainly all nonsense, but this nonsense is beginning to tire me. Well, I can't argue with you, said Stupizin, but I'm sure this is all your imagination. He gets up, pats Osokin on the shoulder, takes the book for which he came, and leaves. Osokin also prepares to go out. Then he walks up to the table and stands there in his hat and coat, lost in thought. Everything would have been different, he says, if I could have gone to the Crimea. And after all, why didn't I go? I could at least have got there, and once there, what would anything have mattered? Perhaps I could have found some work. But how on earth could one live at Yalta without money? Horses, boats, cafes, tips, all that means money, and one has to dress decently. I couldn't have gone there in the same clothes I wear here. All these things are only trifles, but when these same trifles are put together, and she doesn't understand that I could not live there. She thinks that I don't want to come, or that something keeps me here. Will there really be no letter again today? Ivan Osokin goes to inquire whether there are any letters for him at the General Post Office, where he has asked Zinaida to write to him postscriptum. There are no letters. As he comes out, he runs into a man in a dark blue overcoat. Osokin stops and follows the man with his eyes. Who is that man? Where have I seen him? The face is familiar. I know that overcoat. Lost in thought, he walks on. At the corner of the street he stops to allow an open carriage with a pair of horses to pass him. In the carriage are a man and 2 ladies whom he has met at Ouspensky's house. Osokin raises his hand to take off his hat, but they do not see him. He laughs and walks on. At the next corner he meets Zinaida's brother. The latter stops and, taking Osokin's arm, walks along with him, saying, "Have you heard the news? My sister is going to be married to Colonel Minsky. The wedding will be at Yalta, and afterwards they mean to go to Constantinople, and from there to Greece. I'm going to the Crimea in a few days. Have you any message?" Osokin laughs and shakes hands with him, and answers in a cheerful voice, "Yes, give her my greetings and congratulations." Ouspensky says something else, laughs and walks away. Osokin says goodbye to him with a smiling face, but after they have parted, Osokin's face changes. He walks on for some time, then stops and stands looking down the street, taking no notice of the passers-by. "Well, so that is what it means," he says to himself. "Now everything is clear to me. What ought I to do? Go there and challenge Minsky to a duel? But why? It was evidently all decided beforehand, and I was wanted just for amusement. What a good thing I didn't go there. No, that's vile of me. I have no right to think that, and it's not true. All this happened because I did not go. But I certainly shall not go now, and I won't do anything. She is chosen. What right have I to be dissatisfied? After all, what can I offer her? Could I take her to Greece?" He walks on, then stops again and continues to talk to himself. But it seemed to me that she really felt something for me, and how we talked together. There was no one else in the world to whom I could talk in that way. She is so extraordinary, and Minsky is ordinary among the ordinary, a staff colonel, and he reads the Novel Vremya. But quite soon he'll be a man of standing, and I am not even recognized by her friends in the street. No, I cannot. I must either go somewhere or I cannot stay here. Evening. Osokin in his room. He's writing a letter to Zinaida Kuczynski, but tears up sheet after sheet and begins afresh. From time to time he jumps up and walks about the room. Then he begins to write again. At last he throws down the pen and falls back in his chair, exhausted. I can't write any more, he says to himself. I've written to her for whole days and whole nights. Now I feel as though something were broken in me. If none of my other letters said anything to her, this one will say nothing. I cannot. He rises slowly and, moving like a blind man, takes a revolver and cartridges from the drawer of the table, loads the revolver and puts it in his pocket. Then he takes his hat and coat, turns out the lamp and goes out. Chapter 27. On the Threshold. Osokin is at the magician's house. The magician, the same bent old man with a penetrating glance, dressed all in black, with a thin Persian stick inlaid with turquoise in his hand, sits with Osokin near the fire. The same large, strangely furnished room, with its carpets, brocades, bookcases, and bronze figures of Indian gods, the statue of Kuan Yin in a recess, the big celestial globe on a red lacquered stand, the hourglass on the small ivory table near the magician's chair, and the big black Siberian cat sleeping on the back of the chair. Osokin is gloomy. He smokes a cigar and says nothing. At a moment when he is particularly deep in thought, the magician speaks. My dear friend, you knew it before. Osokin starts and looks at him. How do you know what I'm thinking? I always know what you are thinking. Osokin bows his head and stares at the carpet. Yes, I know it cannot be helped now, he says, but if only I could bring back a few years of this miserable time, which does not even exist, as you yourself always say. If only I could get back all the chances which life offered me, and which I threw away. If only I could do things differently. But as he says the words, he suddenly feels afraid. He does not know why. He stops and looks in perplexity at the magician, then he glances round him. What a strange sensation, he says to himself. Has all this happened before? It seemed to me just now that at some other time I have sat here, everything was exactly the same, and I was saying the same words. He looks inquiringly at the magician. The magician returns his look, laughs quietly and nods. Everything has been before, he says, and everything can be brought back. Everything, but even that will not help. Osokin finds himself shivering. What does it all mean? He came to the magician with a definite idea in his mind, but now it eludes him, and he cannot put it in words. He must remember what it was. He must explain it to the magician. Why does this stupid fear paralyze him? He throws his cigar into the fire, rises from his chair, and paces up and down the room. The old man sits watching him, nodding his head and smiling. There is amusement and irony in his look, not an unsympathetic irony, but one full of understanding, of compassion and pity, as though he would like to help but cannot. Osokin stops in front of him and says like a man in a trance, I must go back, then I shall change everything. I cannot go on living like this. We do absurd things because we do not know what lies ahead of us. If only we could know, if only we could see a little way ahead. He walks up and down the room, then again stops in front of the magician. Listen, he says, can't your magic do this for me? Can't you send me back? I've been thinking about it for a long time, and today, when I heard about Zinaida, I felt that this was the only thing left for me. Send me back, I shall do everything differently. I shall live in a new way, and I shall be prepared for meeting Zinaida when the time comes, but I must remember everything, you understand. I must preserve all my experience and knowledge. I must remember that I've come back and not forgot what I've come back for. He stops. God, what am I saying? I said the very same thing then. He looks at the magician. The old man smiles and nods. I can carry out your wish, he says, but it will not be of any use. It will not make things any better for you. Osokin throws himself into an armchair and holds his head in his hands. Tell me, he says, is it true that I have already been here with you before? It is true, says the magician, and I asked you the same thing. You did. And shall I come again? That is not so certain. You may want to come, but you may not be able to. There are many sides to these problems which you do not know yet. You may meet quite unexpected difficulties. One thing only I can say for certain. Circumstances may change, but there is not the slightest possibility of doubt that you yourself will arrive at the same decision. In that there can be no difference and no change. But this is simply turning round on a wheel, says Osokin. It is a trap. The old man smiles. My dear friend, he says, this trap is called life. If you want to repeat the experiment once more, I am at your service, but I warn you, you will change nothing. You can only make things worse. Even if I remember everything? Even if you remember everything. First, because you will not retain this memory for long. It will be too painful, and you yourself will want to get rid of it and forget. And then you will forget. Second, even if you remember, it will not help you. You will remember and still continue to do the same things. But this is horrible, says Osokin. Is there no way out? A nervous trembling takes hold of him, so that again he cannot speak. There is the cold of the grave in this thought. He feels that this is the fear of the inevitable, fear of himself, of that self from which there is no escape. He will be the same, and everything will be the same. At this moment Osokin understands that if he goes back as he is, everything will indeed go in the same way as before. He clearly remembers all those chains of events at school and afterwards, when everything happened as if by clockwork, as in a machine the movement of one wheel makes another wheel move. But at the same time he feels that he cannot accept things as they are now, cannot resign himself to the loss of Zinaida, and to the thought that everything is his own fault. Osokin and the magician are both silent. What am I to do then? Says Osokin at last, almost in a whisper. There is a long pause. My dear friend, says the magician, breaking the silence, those are the first sensible words I've heard from you since the beginning of our acquaintance. You ask what you are to do. Listen to me attentively. What I'm going to say to you is said to a man only once in his life, and even so only to a very few men. If a man fails to understand that it is his own fault, it is not repeated. You come here, you complain, and you ask for a miracle, and when I can I do what you ask, because I sincerely wish to help you, but nothing comes of it. Try now to understand why nothing comes of it, and why I am powerless to help you. Understand that I can carry out only your wishes, only what you ask for. I cannot give you anything on my own initiative. This is the law. Even what I am saying now I am able to say only because you have asked me what you are to do. If you had not asked, I could not have spoken. I can add something more to that. If you go back now, everything will be the same as before, or worse. For instance, you may not meet me. You must understand that chances are limited. No one has unlimited chances, and you never know when you have used your last chance. On the other hand, if you go on living, perhaps something can be changed sufficiently to enable you to start differently the next time. Is it worthwhile living for this? That is your affair. You have to decide for yourself, but remember one thing. If you go back as blind as you are now, you will do the same things again, and a repetition of all that happened before is inevitable. You will not escape from the will. Everything will go on as before. You ask me what you are to do. I answer, live. It is your only chance. If you think carefully, you will find in my words all that you need. But if you still want to go back and begin again, I will send you back even to the day of your birth, if you like. But I warn you that you will come here again, if you can. Now decide. Osokin sits motionless in the armchair. There is another long silence. Scenes and pictures of his life again pass before him. School, mother, Paris, Zinaida. God, how many possibilities he had had and lost one after another. And life kept closing in on him until he finally found himself in a narrow tunnel with no way out. But suppose a way out really exists? Why does the magician insist that he should live? And what is the sense in going back if he is bound to come to the same point again, or perhaps to something even worse? What does the magician mean by this? What could be worse? When I first began to understand that everything repeats and returns, says Osokin to himself, it seemed to me an interesting adventure, but now it frightens me and I feel I must do everything possible to postpone this experience. The adventure which attracted me lies in quite a different direction. Which direction I don't yet know, but I must find it before I can risk returning. At last Osokin looks up. I will live, he says. You are right. I still cannot understand anything, but I do see that to start all this again is not a way out. The magician looks at Osokin for a long time, as though trying to penetrate into his mind. Now that you have said you're going to live, he says at last, I can tell you more, but first I want to ask you, do you think you know your Zenaida well? Osokin looks up in astonishment. I think I do, he says, but what do you mean? The old man smiles again. If you know her well, how could you believe that she would marry Minsky? How could I believe? She said that she would not wait any longer for me, and I could not go. Then I met Krutsky, and he told me. Osokin stops and is suddenly seized by a strange and wonderful feeling of hope, of more than hope, the expectation of a miracle. Why does the magician speak about it? I could not tell you this before, continues the magician, because I may not say anything that can influence your decisions. But now I can tell you that today Colonel Minsky passed through Moscow on his way to Petersburg. Zenaida broke off the engagement 3 days before the wedding. Besides, she never intended to marry him. Only you could fail to understand that. Osokin sits with a bewildered expression on his face. Then she is not going to be married, he says, as though he does not understand what he is saying. But then why? He looks at the magician as though he were seeing him for the first time. But why did you not tell me before? Because you never asked. You accepted it as a fact and came to me with a ready-made decision. I cannot argue against ready-made decisions. Osokin scarcely hears what the magician is saying. God, what an idiot I've been, he says to himself. How could I have believed it? Of course, all this is nothing but her usual acting. She needed Minsky just for amusement, up to a certain point, but not further. Of course, it is clear to me that she would never have married him. How could I misunderstand her so much? Pictures of the last few months pass before him. He sees clearly how he has shut himself up in his pride and obstinacy. Of course he should have gone with Zenaida at all costs. Now, naturally, everything will be different. Dozens of plans begin to form in his head. He sees himself in the train. Wheels are rattling. He is on his way to the Crimea. He will see Zenaida. After all, things can be arranged somehow. The magician is speaking. At first Osokin does not hear. Nothing will change, says the magician. What do you mean by saying that nothing will change, says Osokin. Everything has changed already. The magician shakes his head and smiles. My dear friend, once more you deceive yourself. Nothing has changed. Everything is exactly the same as it has been up till now, and everything will remain the same. Nothing could change, and nothing will change. The wind returneth again according to his circuits. The thing that has been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And nothing can be changed, says Osokin. I never said that nothing can be changed. I said that you cannot change anything, and that nothing will change by itself. I've already told you that in order to change anything you must first change yourself, and this is much more difficult than you think. It requires constant effort for a long time and much knowledge. You are incapable of such effort, and you do not even know how to start. No one is capable of it by himself. People always repeat the same mistakes. At first they simply do not know that they move in a circle, and if they hear about this idea they refuse to believe it. Later, if they begin to see the truth of it and accept it, they think that this is all that is necessary. They become fully convinced that now they know all they need to know, and that they can change everything. And immediately they find charlatans who assure them that everything is very easy and simple. This is the greatest illusion of all. In this way, men lose the chances which they have acquired through much suffering, and sometimes even through great effort. You must remember that one may know many things and be unable to change anything, because changing requires different knowledge and also something which you do not possess. What is the thing we do not possess? This question is very characteristic of you. Like everyone else, you think that you can know everything, when in fact you cannot know anything and cannot understand anything. How can I tell you what it is if it does not exist for you? Osokin is silent. Yes, he feels that the magician is right. He cannot change anything. After his moment of exhilaration, he is seized by fear and anguish. He will again do the same absurd things. He will again lose Seneda. Then what is required to make things begin to change, he asks, and he expects the magician to answer with one of those probably very clever but for him almost meaningless phrases such as, "When you are different, everything else will be different." But the magician says something that Osokin has not anticipated. "You must realize," says the magician, "that you yourself can change nothing and that you must seek help. And it must be a very deep realization, because to realize today and forget tomorrow is not sufficient. One must live with this realization." "But what does it mean to live with this realization?" asks Osokin. "And who can help me?" "I can help you," says the magician, "and to live with this realization means to sacrifice something big for it, not only once, but to go on making sacrifices until you get what you want." "You speak in riddles," says Osokin. "What can I sacrifice? I have nothing." "Everyone has something to sacrifice," says the magician, "except those who cannot be helped. But of course it is impossible to say beforehand what one may get for one's sacrifice. Do you remember the man who had to work 7 years to win a wife, and in the end they gave him the wrong sister? He had to work another 7 years. This often happens." Osokin is silent. Something unpleasant stirs in him. What does the old man want from him? "What I am saying seems strange to you," says the magician, "because you have never thought about these things in the right way. Besides, thinking by itself will not help. Here again one must know, and in order to know one must learn, and in order to learn one must make sacrifices. Nothing can be acquired without sacrifice. This is the thing you do not understand, and until you understand it, nothing can be done. Had I wanted to give you, without any sacrifice on your part, everything you might wish, I could not have done it. A man can be given only what he can use, and he can use only that for which he has sacrificed something. This is the law of human nature. So if a man wants to get help to acquire important knowledge or new powers, he must sacrifice other things important to him at the moment. Moreover, he can only get as much as he has given up for it. There are additional difficulties due to his state. He cannot know exactly what he may get, but if he realizes the hopelessness of his position, he will agree to make sacrifices even without knowing, and he will be glad to do so, because only in this way can he acquire the possibility of gaining something new, or of changing himself. For he does not sacrifice anything, then everything will remain the same for him, or even become worse. "Are there no other ways?" asked Osokin. "You mean ways in which no sacrifices are necessary?" "No, there are no such ways, and you do not understand what you are asking. You cannot have results without causes. By your sacrifice you create causes. There are different ways, but they differ only in the form, magnitude, and finality of the sacrifice. In most cases one has to give up everything at once and expect nothing. There is a dervish song which goes like this: "Through 4 renunciations ascend to perfection. Leave life without regret. Expect no reward in heaven." Do you understand what that means? Most people can only go by this way or by one of the similar ways, but here now you are in a different position. You can talk with me. You can know what you have to give up and what you may get for it. How can I know what I can get, and how shall I know what I have to give up? You can know what you may get through the realization of what it is you want, for some very complicated reasons which are all in yourself. You happen to have guessed a very great secret, which people generally do not know. By itself your guess is useless because you cannot apply it to anything. But the fact that you know this secret opens certain doors for you. You know that everything repeats again and again. There have been other people who made the same discovery, but they could make nothing more of it. If you could change something in yourself, you would be able to use this knowledge for your own advantage. So you see, you do know what you want and what you may get. Now the question of what to sacrifice and how to sacrifice. You say you have nothing. Not quite. You have your life, so you can sacrifice your life. It is a very small price to pay, since you meant to throw it away in any case. Instead of that, give me your life, and I will see what can be made of you. I will even make it easier for you. I shall not require the whole of your life. 20, even 15 years will be sufficient. But during these years you must belong to me. I mean, you must do everything I tell you without evasions and excuses. If you keep your side of the bargain, I shall keep mine. When this time is over, you will be able to use your knowledge for yourself. It is your good luck that you can be useful to me just now. Not at once, certainly, but I can wait if there is anything to wait for. So now you know what you have to sacrifice. There is something else which may be said. People who make the same guess that you have made have certain advantages and certain disadvantages in comparison with other people who guess nothing. Their advantage is that they can be taught what other people cannot be taught, and their disadvantage is that, for them, time becomes very limited. An ordinary man can turn round and round on the wheel, and nothing happens to him until he finally disappears. Again, there are many things you do not know about this, but you must understand that in the course of time even the position of the stars in relation to one another changes, and men depend on the stars much more than they realize, though not in the same way as they think, if they think about it at all. Nothing remains the same in time, but a man who has begun to guess the great secret must make use of it, otherwise it turns against him. It is not a safe secret. When one has become aware of it, one must go on, or one will go down. When one finds the secret or hears about it, one has only 2 or 3, or in any case only a few more lives. You must understand that for reasons of my own I am interested in such people in the same way as I am interested in you. But I can offer my help only at one particular moment, and only once. If my help is not accepted, a man may not find me next time. It may sound strange to you, but the fact is that sometimes I see people who would like to come to me, walking along this street, but they cannot find my house. That is why I told you before that you may want to come to me again, but not be able to. What happens to those people who cannot find your house? Oh, they have other possibilities, but you must understand that every possibility is always more difficult than the preceding one. There is less and less time. If those people do not find you guidance and you help very soon, their lives begin to go down, and after some time they cease to be born and replaced by other people. You must understand they become useless, sometimes dangerous, because they know the great secret and remember many things, but all that they know they understand in the wrong way, and in any case, if they have not used their chances before, then each time their possibilities become fewer. Now you must think about yourself. 15 years seems a long time to you because you are still very young. Later you will see that it is a very short time, especially when you realize what you can get for it. So go home and think. When you have understood and put in the right order everything I have said, you may come here and tell me what you have decided. I can only add one more thing. Like everyone else, you think that there are different ways of doing the same thing. You have to learn to understand that there is always only one way of doing a thing. There can never be 2 ways. But you will not come to this easily. For a long time you will have a great deal of inner argument. All this has to be destroyed. Only then will you be ready for real work. And understand another thing. Only when you are useful to me will you be useful to yourself. I must also warn you that there are many dangers on the way. Dangers about which you have never heard, or heard quite wrongly. A long time ago I met a very disagreeable gentleman who is sometimes pictured with horns and hoofs. He is not so big as some people make him out to be, but his chief occupation in life is to hinder the development of people who have guessed the great secret. And my occupation is to hinder him. So you must understand that very powerful forces will be opposed to you, and you will be alone, always alone. Remember this. Now go and come back when you have decided. Take as much time as you like, but I advise you not to delay too long. Chapter 28. Conclusion. Out in the street, Osokin walks for a long time without looking where he is going and trying not to think. Then he sits down on a bench on some remote boulevard and remains motionless without thoughts. But gradually all that has happened comes back to him. I must come to some decision, he says to himself. If I give myself up to the magician for 15 years, I shall lose Zinaida. If I do not give myself up, I shall still lose her. It was the magician who found her for me. If only I could have one talk with her. But no, that would be useless. It would be impossible to explain the magician to Zinaida. All this would frighten her. For all her complexity, she's very elementary. She would say that I must do what she advised, that is, live like other people, get a job somewhere or something of that sort. This I cannot do. It is useless for me to try. But perhaps I am wrong about Zinaida again. Perhaps she can understand everything, even the magician. It is true, she said all that about life in ordinary circumstances, but it was from a different point of view, and I never tried to explain things fully to her, though she always wanted me to tell her everything. But how strange it all is. Last night everything was over. I believed that Zinaida was going to be married, and I went to the magician and asked him to send me back so that I could change my life and put everything right. Then, while I was speaking to him, I suddenly realized that I had already come to him, asking the same thing before, and he had sent me back, and I had found myself at school, and everything had gone the same way as before. Again, I had done the same absurd things down to the smallest details, although I always knew beforehand what would happen, and again I came back to the magician. Can all this be really true? Perhaps none of it happened. Perhaps the magician simply put me to sleep and I dreamed that I was living my life over again. What actually happened? It is impossible to verify. I don't know and never shall know. Perhaps the truth lies in the very fact that it can neither be proved nor disproved. After all, there is a difference. Yesterday I thought that Zinaida was going to be married. Now I know that she could not have married Minsky. And now I have to decide what answer to give the magician. This is new. This did not happen before. And then about the devil. What did he say about this disagreeable gentleman with horns and hoofs? There was something very interesting about it, but I must confess that I did not listen properly when he was speaking. I must ask him next time. Now the idea is that I must do something to prevent things from happening to me in the same way again. The magician said that in some way the devil is mixed up in this. How funny. I always thought that we could do our worst without any help from the devil. So the only thing to do is to give myself up to the magician. Strange. I've heard of such things before, but they always seemed to me to be invented, and I saw no meaning or purpose in them. Now it appears that they actually happen, and that there is much meaning in them, and a very definite purpose. I know it is silly, but there is something in me that is a little afraid of the magician, although at the same time I know that I am in a privileged position. I have nothing to be afraid of because I have nothing to lose, and things cannot be worse than they are now. Osokin slips his hand into his pocket and touches something cold and heavy. The revolver. He had quite forgotten it. He smiles ironically. Yes, the 3 roads of the Russian fairy tale, he says to himself. If you take the first road, you will lose your horse. If you take the second road, you will perish yourself. And if you take the third, you will both lose your horse and perish yourself. Which to choose? He gets up and walks slowly along the boulevard. Dawn is breaking. Tomorrow I must give my answer. I cannot wait longer, though what answer I shall give I don't know yet. It is hard to believe that I can actually do nothing at all, but at the same time, what have I done so far? I've only spoiled everything. To give myself up to the magician? That again seems strange, even cowardly. Probably this is where the greatest illusion lies, because to become convinced and to admit to oneself that one can actually do nothing is not cowardly at all. On the contrary, if it is true, this is the bravest thing one can do. But it is difficult to believe. If only I could see Zinaida just once before I gave my answer. He told me to take my time. Perhaps I can go to the Crimea. Things can always be arranged. Well, tomorrow. Osokin walks home. Moscow is waking up. Church bells ring for early mass. Carriages rattle along. Drovniks sweep the cobbled streets, raising clouds of dust. 2 cats, one grey and white and the other yellow, sit opposite each other on the pavement very intently and seem to converse. Osokin looks round and suddenly an extraordinarily vivid sensation sweeps over him that, if he were not there, everything would be exactly the same.